Hola amigos! For beginner riders, it's usually considered a good practice to start with a small bike and gradually go bigger and bigger. And for the most part, it's true. Generally, new riders tend to learn faster on smaller bikes. However, there are also several bad habits which a beginner rider can develop if he chooses to start with a small, lightweight motorcycle instead of going big right away. Today we'll have a look at what benefits we can have by starting our motorcycling journey with a small bike. And also, we'll learn how to avoid some very common bad habits which new riders tend to develop on smaller bikes. Let's go! Generally, for most new riders, starting with smaller, lighter bike with like 150, 250cc engine is considered a really good idea. Even up to the point that in some countries it's mandatory to start on smaller bike. In other places you can begin with whatever you want. For example, in Russia you totally can start with 300 horsepower Kawasaki H2R. That's because Russia is all about no restrictions and freedom of choice, if you didn't know.
You serious?
Jokes aside though, there are plenty of advantages in starting small. The most obvious is that with smaller, less powerful engine, you have much more control over your throttle. If you are a bit clumsy with your throttle action on 250, you can feel a bit jerky on your bike, but usually it's nothing serious. At the same time, on big powerful bike with twitchy throttle you can easily get yourself in trouble. Next obvious reason to start small is the weight. Big bikes can easily weigh more than 250 kilos, and dropping that on your feet, which you'll certainly do once or twice as a beginner, is not the most pleasant experience. With small bike, most of the time you will not even drop it to begin with, because usually you'll be able to keep it upright. But even if you drop it on yourself, it's not usually a big deal, if you wear your gear, of course. Speaking of dropping it, don't forget another big advantage. Small bikes are usually significantly cheaper than big ones, and the parts and repairs are much cheaper too. If you tip over, let's say, a Goldwing, you can easily spend a week and few $100 on repairs if you are unlucky. If you drop some basic 250, well, in most cases you just pick it up and proceed with riding. For a lot of people, this creates a psychological learning barrier in a sense. They are afraid to practice on a bike because they are afraid to drop it. And with no practice, you actually increase a chance to damage you and your bike someday. So they end up in a loop. They fear to drop the bike and don't practice, and because they don't practice, they fear to drop the bike. Starting with small motorcycle, it's usually not a problem. You can practice basics like clutch, throttle and brake control, lean on your bike, fast transitions, etc. And then, when you already know the basics, you'll have much more confidence to practice on bigger bike. And another big advantage of getting smaller first bike is that they usually have pretty good resale value, especially if you buy it second hand. You can literally buy a small first bike second hand, use it to learn riding for several months, drop it a few times, and then you'll sell it almost for the same price as you bought it. Maybe a couple of $100 less. If you think about it, it's not a bad deal. Often, one of the main reasons why people want to start on a big bike right away is that they want something they can own for a good while. But the problem with this approach is that as a brand new rider you can't fully evaluate a particular bike before you buy it. And I personally saw more than once how people buy an expensive new fancy motorcycle and then, in a month or two, realize that it is not really what they wanted. Then they have either to cope with it and ride the bike that don't fit them, or they have to sell it. And with bigger and more expensive motorcycles, it's usually a bit harder to sell them fast, unless you give a big discount. For that reason, to start on something smaller is not a bad idea either. Okay, now when I successfully convinced you to buy a small bike and I earned a raise from my Bajaj employers, let's discuss some downsides of learning on 250 bike. If you are learning on a little motorcycle, you can pick up some bad habits over time. They are not really bad per se, they become bad for you when you transition to a bigger and heavier bike. There are 4 main issues which I often can see. First one is about relying too much on your feet to stabilize the bike. With light 200cc bike, if you start to tip over, you can pretty easily catch it just by putting your foot down. When you go heavier, you can't really do that anymore. Big bikes can easily weigh over 250 kilos or 600 pounds. And human legs are simply not designed to carry this weight. If you are used to dangle your feet for extra stability, on a heavy motorcycle, sooner or later you'll learn that it doesn't work this way. On heavy motorcycle, your feet should be always on the foot pegs, and you should learn to catch your bike not with your feet, but with your clutch friction zone. Speaking of which, the second common bad habit with low displacement motorcycle riders is the lack of use of friction zone at slow speed riding. On small bikes, you don't really have to use the friction zone much, because at first gear on idle, you can fully release the clutch and still go pretty slow, like about 4 or 5 miles per hour, which in most cases is slow enough for any slow speed situation you can encounter. And as we already know, we always can use our feet to help us in the tight spot. However, with bigger bikes we can't do that. Even at idle, in first gear they go much faster. This KTM, for example, goes about 11 miles per hour on idle. And some bigger bikes can easily go up to 18 miles at idle speed, which is way too high for a slow speed riding situation. So, on big bikes, if we want to ride confidently, we are forced to use clutch friction zone technique at slow speeds. With lack of clutch control technique, we can easily end up embarrassing ourselves in a situation like this. As you can see, feet don't help here. To deal with dangling feet and lack of clutch control, you can do slow speed exercises like slow races, slaloms, figure eights and circles. Most of them force you to use your clutch friction zone extensively. And as you become more and more proficient with it, you'll see that you need less and less feet dabs, until you don't need them at all. I have the whole bunch of those exercises on this channel, plus I am going to translate more of them from my Russian channel. So, don't forget to subscribe to be updated. Apart from clutch control, slow speed exercises really improve your balance, your peripheral vision, your body and arms position, your steering and your line planning. So, invest some time in them exercises, you won't regret it. Third issue is with the throttle control. As I already said, most of the time you can get away with twitchy throttle control. Small engine allows to do it. But as soon as you start doing this on a liter bike, you're going to have a big surprise. So, even if you ride a small bike, try to be very conscious with your throttle. Use it in a small and controlled way, don't jerk it, and be very precise with it. Later, when you switch to a bigger bike, you'll thank yourself more than once. To help you master the throttle, you can do Moto Gymkhana courses. Moto Gymkhana is not a slow speed riding, as a lot of people think. In fact, it's the opposite. On those courses, you have to go as fast as you can, since the goal is to go through the course in the shortest amount of time. On Moto Gymkhana we don't use friction zone. The clutch is always all the way out. And with big lean angles, you must be really smooth with your throttle, since you don't have the friction zone to smooth things up. And with big lean angles, you can lose traction even with a small engine. And fourth thing, which can be a problem when transitioning from a small to a big bike, is the lack of counter steering. As you probably already know, counter steering is a thing which all motorcycle riders do to a degree, even people who doesn't know they do it. You even can sometimes stumble on an opinion that you don't really need to learn counter steering because you already naturally do it. Fair enough, but people who don't know about counter steering or don't practice it usually can't lean their bike fast enough and far enough when a need arises. That's because naturally, if we don't learn counter steering, we also tend to shift our body weight to help us lean the bike. And it works to a certain point, especially on lighter bikes. But to no surprise, when you try to do it on heavy motorcycle, it doesn't work as good, because the weight of the bike itself now is too big against your body weight. So, just as with throttle control, if you ride a small bike, learn counter steering and be very conscious about using it. This way you'll have much easier time going on bigger bike later. So, as a quick summary, small bikes are awesome. If you are a beginner and you think to get one for training, go for it. But if you are planning to switch to a bigger bike later, pay closer attention to your clutch control, to your throttle control, master the counter steering, and don't rely too much on dabbing your feet to recover your balance. Your feet should belong to the foot pegs. If you want to know more about friction zone and clutch control, here will be video about that. And to know more about counter steering, click here. Now I think that's enough for today. I hope you find this video useful. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you soon. Adios!